In Spanish, like in English, sometimes people can be a little bit reluctant to talk about the topic of death. But this week in the UK is Dying Matters Awareness Week, so we're going to talk about death, la muerte. Now, the most important word, I suppose, here is the verb to die, which is morir. Morir is a bit of an irregular verb. It's a stem-changing verb, so yo muero, it goes to M-U-E. Muero, mueres, muere. Morimos, moris, mueren. So it follows that boot shape that I've talked about before. Muero, mueres, muere. Morimos, moris, mueren. So there's no stem change in the nosotros, vosotros, and the vos form. In the past tense, if I want to say someone has died, the past participle is irregular. Instead of taking off the IR and adding ido, morido, it goes to muerto. For example, mi abuelo ha muerto. My grandpa, my granddad has died. If I want to say he is dead, I need to say está muerto. And notice I'm not saying es muerto, I'm saying está muerto. I'm using estar. Lots of people think of ser as for permanent things, estar for temporary things. Well, depending on your religious beliefs, being dead is quite permanent, unfortunately. We still use estar, so always remember that exception, estar muerto, to be dead. If I'm describing someone who's feminine, I'd say está muerta. Mi abuela está muerta. There's another verb which you might come across, particularly in newspapers, which is fallecer. This is a bit like passed away. You know, it sounds a little bit more formal than morir. I might say, for example, I might have read in the newspaper, El Papa falleció. The Pope died. El Papa falleció. Instead of El Papa ha muerto. Now, you might have seen muerto before in Dia de los Muertos or Dia de Muertos, a Mexican celebration also celebrated in some of the surrounding countries that celebrates life and doesn't celebrate death, but really puts a spin on death that maybe we could use in the UK and in other countries where we treat it as a taboo topic and it's entirely sad. Obviously, it is a difficult time when you lose a loved one, when someone dies, but I really like how Dia de Muertos actually focuses on remembering that person. So let's talk about the verb to remember, which is recordar. It's a bit of a false friend, makes you think it means to record something, but it's to remember. And like morir, it's a stem changer. Recuerdo, like muero, recuerdo. The O changes to a UE in that boot shape. Recuerdo, recuerdas, recuerda, recordamos, recordáis, recuerdan. Recuerdo a mi abuelo que está muerto con mucha alegría. Now, if I want to talk about death rather than died or the verb to die, I want to talk about the noun death. It's la muerte. So even though it ends in E, words that end in E, sometimes they're el, sometimes they're la. More often than not, I'd say they're la, like la carne, la leche, la muerte. La muerte. So it's a feminine noun. When someone dies, normally there is un entierro. Un entierro is a burial. Now, la tierra is the earth, the soil, the earth, la tierra. So entierro, it kind of makes sense. You're interring them. You're putting them into the earth, un entierro. And often, in many cultures, there's then un velorio. Un velorio is a wake, and velas are candles. You might have lots of candles at a wake. Un velorio. Una tumba. Una tumba is like a grave or a tomb, una tumba. En Día de Muertos, por ejemplo, los familiares de los muertos decoran las tumbas. Day of the Dead, the family members of the dead decorate the tombs or ponen muchas velas, lots of candles, like a velorio, like a wake. Sometimes when people die, there are questions, there are sometimes legal issues or even family disputes about the testamento, the last will and testament. Now, when someone dies, if you have a colleague and you know that they've just lost a loved one, in English you might say, I'm so sorry, or my condolences. In Spanish you say, mi más sentido pésame. It's like my most heartfelt condolence. Mi más sentido pésame. If you want to say rest in peace, instead of RIP, rest in peace, what you'll see in Spanish is DEP, descansa en paz. Descansar is the verb to rest. So literally rest in peace, descansa en paz. And you might say, que en paz descanse, may he rest in peace. My grandpa, may he rest in peace. Mi abuelo, que en paz descanse. Some more words, we have el funeral. El funeral, followed by el entierro, the burial, el velorio, the wake. El ataúd, the coffin. Finally, a couple of phrases talking about grief, talking about the period of mourning. We have estar de luto. Estar de luto, to be in mourning. Mi abuela está de luto por la muerte de mi abuelo. My grandma is in mourning for the death, or because of, due to, por, the death of my grandpa. Estar en duelo, very similar. I'd say you hear luto used more than duelo generally. Luto you can think of as mourning, and estar en duelo is to be in the grieving process, to be in the stages of grief. Estar en duelo, sentir el duelo, hacer el duelo. You'll hear it in different ways. So there's some vocabulary that we need to talk about la muerte, something which is often treated like a taboo topic, but it's something that is probably the only guaranteed thing in life, is, that it comes to an end. So without wanting to be morbid or put a downer on your day, hopefully you can take part in this campaign to have the conversation about la muerte, and in your Spanish learning to not avoid this topic because it does come up. What you don't want is to be having a conversation, practicing your Spanish, the topic of la muerte comes up. You ask them, ¿Qué hiciste la semana pasada? What did you do last week? And they come back with, fue el funeral de mi abuelo. It was my grandpa's funeral. And then you're at a loss for words. You can say, mi más sentido pésame. Lo siento, I'm sorry. My most heartfelt condolences. And you can have this conversation because now you've got the vocabulary.